I think the energy rabbit hole itself is just as deep and interesting as Bitcoin's. And I kind of think it's the defining issue of our time, actually, how humans relate to energy. And I actually wouldn't have gone anywhere near this deep had it not been for Bitcoin and the FUD. So, thank you, FUDsters, for really bringing me into an issue that is I still barely understand. Most people don't understand at all, and yet it's defining. It's a defining issue of our day. And yeah, of course. I mean, I think we'll get into this. I think Bitcoin has a huge role to play in our energy future, what that future looks like, and taking advantage of it, whatever it does look like. But energy itself, quite apart from Bitcoin, is absolutely fascinating and counterintuitive. And that has been, Shaun was asking me what's been like the high points of my experience since being in Bitcoin. And the first thing that jumped to mind was just like learning. And learning about what? Well, you learn about everything in Bitcoin, as you know, but maybe the most rewarding and surprising thing that I'm learning about is energy.
Danny, what was that Brandon Quittem quote?
He said, Bitcoin mining is everything you don't know about energy combined with everything you don't know about Bitcoin. It's pretty perfect.
And just to add to that, I remember clearly when Peter Van Valkenburg was called in front of the Senate testimony. He had a Senate testimony hearing with regards to Bitcoin. And he has this brilliant quote, and I will get it wrong. But what he said is that for every illicit transaction or use of Bitcoin for illicit purposes, there's somebody in Nigeria or Belarus who's using Bitcoin to fight against authoritarianism. For every other illicit use, there is somebody using Bitcoin for good. And he said, look, technology is neutral, be used for good and bad. And all of the energy FUD really came to a fore for us 2 days ago. We interviewed Eric from Gridless down in Africa, and he was explaining to us, 40% of people there do not have electricity. Once it goes dark, they go to bed because it's pitch black. Kids can't, maybe they can learn, they can do some work via paraffin light, but that is also dangerous. And he talked to me about that, and it just made me think of the privileged fucks who sit in, well-developed Western cities criticizing Bitcoin without really considering the positive impact it brings to communities, in places like this. So I feel like that the Bitcoin mining thing is now extending that point from Peter Van Valkenburg.
Yeah, it's amazing that you have to learn about energy poverty, energy scarcity from Bitcoin FUD, and then actually finding out how Bitcoin is addressing it. That's not how we should learn about energy scarcity. It should be, it's a huge headline that 1 billion people don't have reliable access to power and that their lives are measurably and substantially worse in all sorts of ways because of that, and their economy is worse. But that is indeed how I learned about it.
I think that's what forced me to reconsider and not just ignore someone like Alex Epstein, who, like I said, I've said before, I don't 100% agree with him, but he's at least made me reconsider other people around the world and their economic situation. How about yourself, Shaun? Over the last year or so, what's really stood out for you?
Sure. And I'll tie into kind of the energy rabbit hole, right? And so for me, it's like I've started that journey about 4 years ago on the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and so for energy, it's like I spent about 15, 20 years in the energy trading space. Had done an executive energy MBA, and I knew a bit about the space, and so I'd say that with my combined experience before, I was about a third of the way down that kind of energy rabbit hole. And in just the past 2 years, you start kind of learning about all these different applications and kind of, my experience I've had in the past couple of years in kind of Bitcoin mining space is like, I've gone deeper, but I recognize that there's still an infinite amount that still is undiscovered along that journey. As it relates to kind of like what you're talking about within, you said it was in Africa, the use case?
Yeah. Kenya?
Yeah. And Troy brought this up, I think, on your last show, and it's kind of like Bitcoin as a tool, right? And so I think what we're learning is I had a conversation with Troy about this afterwards, is I kind of been envisioning Bitcoin mining as just like this Swiss Army knife, right? And there's several different tools, and there's several different kind of benefactors for using this tool. And, I might use kind of like the screwdriver most at my house. Troy might use the corkscrew most at his house, but that tool can be used differently in different applications in different markets, right? So for example, the Bitcoin mining Swiss Army knife in West Texas is absorbing a lot of excess renewables, helping you kind of accelerate the renewables build out to create this customer that can purchase when nobody else wants, but also turn down when there's scarcity events. And you talked about now in Africa, like that tool is saying, okay, now we need to use that Swiss Army knife to bootstrap a community, right? To create some type of economic benefit to having some type of mining that's in some place that was tapping into some resource that might not be able to be tapped into unless you had this really kind of mobile application that can be used to kind of create that. And so kind of helping kind of, build these communities in remote places. So it really is this kind of like Swiss Army knife that has, many kind of benefactors. I think about benefactors of, a policymaker, right? So what does it do to policymakers is that we're in this energy transition where you need to go from, fossil fuels to renewables. And so this is now, something that policymakers can have as a flexible resource that kind of helps them, bridge that gap, right? To kind of get to that, which is like a flexible resource for having more renewables come to the grid. For grid operators, they're most concerned about reliability of the grid, right? And so that means that, they don't want to be doing load shedding, right? So they want to be able to have capacity available for them for kind of, in case there's a plant that trips offline, they've got something that can turn up. But they also want to have resources that can kind of real-time manage supply and demand, right? So that's now the tool for the grid operators. Then you think about the benefactor of a renewables developer, right? Who has this perpetual deposit of wind and or sun, and they've got this renewable asset, but they can't get good value out of it because there's no power lines to kind of take that power to the locations. And so this tool to that developer now is saying, these other miners are now going to come to them, right? So it's this ability to create a new customer that doesn't need to have these wires to be sent. So these now you can start, accelerating more renewables because they're getting more value for their power. And then, lastly, the Bitcoin miners, right? Which is, the economic value that they're getting by having low cost power and, locating these unique places. So it really is a kind of a fascinating tool that's, different in every single market and not the same use case, but a special tool.
I really like that Swiss Army knife analogy.
Shaun has one more, which is which I also like and have to mention, which is duct tape.
We'll come back to duct tape. Swiss Army knife. But I don't think it's the Bitcoin mining as a Swiss Army knife. I think Bitcoin itself is a Swiss Army knife. And anyone who comes to Bitcoin finds out how it helps them. What use is it for them, whether you're a company or an individual? I know what use it is for me. The most prominent use or the most obvious use is the times where I have to pay or get paid, and we don't have a way to transfer from bank to bank. That is, I can talk about savings, investment, but really that is an actual tool. That is a tool that I've used for the purpose of running a business. Bitcoin mining has almost become this, developed as this unknown. It came out of nowhere and is now offering all these new exciting things with regards to grids and landfill sites, as I spoke with Adam Wright. I'm intrigued to see what the unknown unknowns are that come out in the future, because I expect there will be more. I don't know what it will be, but I expect people will figure out how to use this technology for other things. We've spoken about unknown unknowns.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's some kind of switch flipped for me at some point as I kept seeing new applications that surprised me about Bitcoin mining. Mining on landfill gas was one of those, but I didn't know about grid balancing. For one, I didn't know the role that the Bitcoin mine could play in providing ancillary services to the grids. I didn't really understand the problems that renewable developers had, the financial problems they had that Bitcoin solves. And I didn't foresee the extent and variety of uses of waste heat from Bitcoin mining, which I think we're only beginning to understand. I was telling Shaun last night, when I looked at the percentage of energy worldwide that goes to heat, it's just extraordinary. It dwarfs the Bitcoin network by orders of magnitude, and it contributes to peak demand from the grid. So heating and cooling are especially powerful sources of load, right? So yeah, I didn't foresee any of this in Bitcoin, and I wonder what we're not seeing. Having missed all of these things to begin with, I wonder what we're not seeing, and that's kind of the most exciting thought to me about mining is what little parts of that Swiss Army knife tools have we not even unlocked yet? And also, which ones are going to be used the most, and in what applications? And that's where I have a huge question mark. It's not even like the tools we don't know about, but what's the distribution? How much Bitcoin mining is going to be, distributed in capturing waste methane around the world? How much of it's going to be centralized in large, data centers? And how much of it is going to make use of, I guess what we're looking at here is kind of alternate revenue streams other than the Bitcoin that come out of your mining. And the question is what's the volume of the alternate revenue streams and the distribution of those streams? And then what are the second order effects of that distribution on energy systems and the economy? And those are big open questions for me.
So, as you know, I'm making a film next week, and one of the most interesting things, the thing I'm most excited for, we're going to see a guy who heats his swimming pool with ASICs. I mean, how fucking cool is that? Like, he is heating his pool and mining Bitcoin at the same time. I just think that's incredible. But yeah, those unknowns are kind of like the exciting part. But it's Bitcoin's like evolving into this thing that none of us really know what it might, like its final form will be. But it does feel like it's becoming this kind of backbone of human coordination, and where incentives matter. It is kind of like this perfect free market where incentives are driving these new forms of activity. And the great thing about these incentives is making it harder for the fuzzers to argue against them, and it's making it more difficult for regulators to argue against the benefit it brings to everyone.
It's really hard to ban heaters.
Yeah.
If they happen to do some computation along the way.
Heaters and bank code and
it's a real Luddite move to say here's a technology it does a lot of different things. Some of them we don't even know about yet, but let's ban it right now just in case. It's a real Luddite move.
I usually don't like overlapping analogies, but the duct tape actually kind of comes into play here, which is like. So it is a Swiss Army knife, right? And we're discovering that, like, the one tool that we thought was there, which was like hashing, right, to produce Bitcoin. Turns out there's a tool for grid balancing, ancillary services, communities, right? All these things that are on there. An overlay to that is that, and you talked up here about like the unknown unknowns about kind of what's going to come out of it. And I was looking at kind of some other comparisons to Bitcoin, and one of them that came up was duct tape, right? And so duct tape was invented in World War II. And the reason for the invention was it was originally a green tape, and it was called duct tape, and not with a T. And it was for keeping the ammunition cases, the water out, right? And so then it was green, kind of looked like a duck, and so they call it duct tape. But during the war, they discovered it had all these other benefits and uses that they could kind of use for kind of weapons and kind of, fix things. And, what we use duct tape for. The war ended, and then there started to be kind of like a housing boom, and they started using the duct tape on ducts in the houses, right? And so kind of using this tape for those ducts, and it changed from green tape to silver tape, and then it just exploded, right? And it's just like, and now every house I've got 4 rolls of duct tape in my house, and I use it for many different things, right? And so there's a lot of unknowns that came out of this initial, keep the ammunitions cases dry. And now it's just kind of like widespread everywhere. So it's kind of discovering that about like the Bitcoin of just like the duct tape was originally just hashing, but then we're figuring out all these other use cases for plugging holes in different areas and different communities. And there's still a lot of unknowns, right, that are still coming out.